And we're live. Hello and welcome to our virtual presentation of Miracle Country, a memoir by Kendra Atleework. Joining Kendra this evening is critically acclaimed writer Luis Alberto Urrea. Before I properly introduce our guests, I do have some brief guidelines and announcements. And excuse me for the lack of camera on me. We did have some technical issue on that. But moving on, this event includes an audience Q&A. To submit a question, please use the Ask a Question function at the bottom of the screen. You can also vote for any questions you'd like for Kendra and Luis to answer, and they will make their way to the top of the list. If you're considering supporting our bookstore by purchasing a copy of tonight's featured book, then just click on the green purchase button directly below the screen. The link will take you to our website where you can complete your purchase. And to learn more about upcoming virtual events, please check out our calendar on our website or subscribe to our newsletter. And with that said, let me finally introduce our guests. Kendra Atleework was born and raised on the dry edge of California at the eastern base of the Sierra Nevada mountains. She moved away for 11 years, mostly spent being homesick and researching the place she left behind, the product of which is Miracle Country. She received her MFA in creative writing from University of Minnesota, Minneapolis, and is a recipient of the AWP Intro Journals Project Award. She also serves on the board of the Ellen Malloy Fund for Desert Writers. Joining her tonight is Luis Alberto Urrea, who is a critically acclaimed writer who uses his dual culture life experiences to explore greater themes of love, loss, and triumph. He is the best-selling author of 17 books, including Across the Wire, The Water Museum, and The Devil's Highway. He is also a nominee and winner of numerous awards, including an Edgar, Lannan Literary Award, and a Pulitzer. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to our guests. Enjoy the talk, everyone.
Hi, Kendra.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, everybody.
So what are you going to talk about?
Well,
How about that book of yours?
yeah.
Yeah.
You mean this book?
Yeah, there it is.
Sure.
I would just say to the audience now, order it. You won't be sorry. Buy it. If you don't like it, I'll return your money. It's that good.
Thank you.
So Kendra, you know I love that book. And by the way, I was telling Kendra earlier, I got my COVID haircut for her. I hadn't had a haircut since February, so feeling a little self-conscious, but got it cut. So yeah, I went crazy for your book. And I still am super fond of it. And I've got so many things I want to talk about with you about it. But first of all, what do you want to say to us all?
Oh, yeah, it's super exciting for this to be finally out. It's been out for a week, and I've been getting some emails from people who read it already, and it's really exciting because you work on something for, in this case, 6 years by yourself in your weird lair, and you wonder if it's going to make any sense to anyone else. And then when it does, you're like, oh, that's what my 20s were not wasted. I didn't totally blow my 20s writing this thing.
So were you always a writer? I know you were a post-punk rocker. I just found that out. I'm so excited about that.
Right.
But did you always want to be a writer?
I wanted to be a writer and/or an airplane pilot as a child.
Wow.
An airplane pilot was also an option. I wanted to be a pilot of a small plane, and I was gonna fly around and pick up animals in the wilderness that needed medical attention and bring them to a vet. So that was the first dream. Yes.
I like that.
It had to be adjusted a little bit because I'm not that good. I don't have that much mechanical aptitude. So there's plenty of flying and piloting in this book done by my dad, but
Yeah.
I had to become a writer instead.
It's a good choice, I think. You picked well. You picked well, madam. Yeah, I think I wanted to be Steve McQueen first. And then maybe later I thought I could be Jim Morrison. And then I thought, I don't think I'm going to do any of those things, actually.
Everyone needs to be.
Yeah. But here we are doing our thing. So let's jump into the book a little bit. I don't know if you want to share a couple of favorite passages or not, but I want to ask you, as I mentioned to you earlier today on our little emails, about I love the passages about the kind of water revolution that happened up there, and I have been so fascinated by the kind of the kind of shadows of what went on to happen in Los Angeles, say with the stolen water. You know, there's some seeds of the entire sort of Chinatown, Mulholland stuff in this book that just fascinates me, and I wanted to ask you about that, including blowing up those doggone gates. You know, that's my favorite thing.
Yeah. The gates. That was a fun part to write. I can read something from that.
Yeah.
So I'll give people a little bit of context. What we're talking about is my home area, Owens Valley, Eastern Sierra. Okay, the real name of it is Payahunadu, which means land where water flows. And it was an extremely sort of an improbably irrigated place because we're by the Sierra Nevada mountains, and they get tons of snow, and then that water melts out of the mountains in the spring, and all summer the snow gradually melts across the valley. And the Paiutes had pretty extensive irrigation going on here before ranchers showed up. So it really was not, it's a desert. We get 0 to 5 annual inches of rain, but the name Land of Flowing Water, Payahunadu, was not ironic. So now if you come here, you see a very, very different place, because first you had ranchers arrive, take that land, start co-opting those irrigation ditches, which are still around, the ancient ones are still around for their own agricultural purposes. And then the city of Los Angeles comes in, and by 1913 started building a 230-mile aqueduct, later expanded all the way up to Mono Lake. And the water is now exported from my valley to Los Angeles. So it's the reason that Los Angeles is the size that it is. It continues to get a pretty significant amount of its water from here. And it's an ongoing negotiation and struggle for the local people here to keep enough water here for our economy to exist and our ecosystem to not get totally messed up. So but the history's really got a lot of like dynamite and stuff. So I'm going to read a little bit about some of the efforts of people to prevent the city from taking the water. And actually, I think I'll start by reading about 2 boys who in the 1970s, so this all happened in the starting in 1913, 1920s was when most of the efforts to dynamite, the local ranchers were dynamiting the Los Angeles aqueduct, blowing it up. The water was flowing back into the desert. But that effort was picked up again in the 1970s by a couple of teenagers. So I'm going to read that part, because I think it gets at the sense of how this sense of loss has stayed with the place through the decades. Still, a loss lingers like humidity in damper places. Near midnight in September of 1976, 2 boys from Owens Valley used a crowbar to break into a shed containing equipment for the maintenance of wilderness trails. From the shed, they took 2 cases of dynamite, blasting caps, and 20 feet of fuse. Surely the boys knew the tradition of Owens Valley ranchers who attacked the pipeline 9 times between 1924 and 1927, placing dynamite by moonlight at crucial junctures. In November 1924, hundreds of valley folks camped for 5 days by a set of steel doors embedded in the aqueduct, called the Alabama Gates. The gates sit next to the Alabama Hills, beside the empty, salty body of Owens Lake. Nearby, the Alabamas are more rock garden than foothill, half-buried boulders worn oblong by blowing dust. They stand upright, pronged like fingers. Some are 50 feet tall, others small enough to step over. From here, skirted in brown, the Sierra appears perfectly vertical. The Alabama Gates keep water from returning to the lake bed and control the flow in the aqueduct. In 1924, 700 people gathered at the gates. Darkened storefronts in Bishop were hung with signs. If I am not on the job, you can find me at the aqueduct. A group of men from Owens Valley turned the wheels that opened the gates while everyone else threw hats in the air and the water coursed back to its old home. Perhaps that water was a wall. Maybe it roared, splattered, and rushed out of the spillway, soaking the men standing by, cold water, icy, but they couldn't step away. They saw the dust of the valley covered up with the glint of a new river. I know there are at least 100 sawed-off shotguns in this territory, said the Inyo County Sheriff, by way of explaining why he could not disperse the crowd. The valley people, he said, feel they are fighting for their homes, and they are of the stock that fights. Inyo County is in a state of anarchy, the Los Angeles Times declared. Guerrilla warfare is a possibility. Appalling loss of lives and property seems certain. Women as well as men are ready to shoot in the defense of their homes. While waiting for the city to agree to further negotiations, the valley people set up camp and threw a party. A barbecue pit, tents and bedrolls, and kids kicking up dust. One man sent word to friends camped at the ditch that his cattle grazed just north of you across the ditch. Tell Jim to collect the fattest ones for your barbecue. You are welcome as long as they last. A half-century later, 2 boys found the Alabama gates in darkness. They ran before they heard the explosion.
Yeah. Didn't we talk about one time when we were corresponding going down there and blowing the gates up again?
I'm sure many people have considered it.
Yeah. I think if you're not from the Southwest, you might not even understand that incredible value of water and the need for water. There's so many echoes of so many stories that this reminds me of. I think about the Milagro Beanfield War. I think about so many things. I love that whole passage in your book. I'm curious how you how did you strike the balance between the elements? Because there are certain elements in the book of kind of nature writing, and then there are elements of the creative nonfiction portrait of place, and then there's the wonderful stuff about family, like you mentioned, Dad's flying. But then there's this wonderful, and maybe my favorite part of it, aside from just the general milieu, Mary Austin's shadow. Did these varied elements, which you somehow made come together into a whole, did they present themselves bit by bit, or did you have that overall design? Because I kind of fly by the seat of my pants. You know what I mean? The books start telling me what they want, and I think, oh God, now how do I do that? I was wondering if you're more organized than I am.
Yeah, probably not. No, I think it's just like I knew I never wanted to write a chronological memoir in which I was actually the main event, because that wasn't what was interesting to me. I at first thought I wasn't going to even be in the book. I was going to write like an Ian Fraser's Great Plains.
Man.
Yeah. But then I quickly realized that I couldn't tell this. I needed to tell the story of my family and myself, my relationship to this place. And then that's going to be the narrative arc that the other stuff is attached to. But it all just feels so related. Like if you pulled out, it's like pickup sticks. If you pulled out the wrong piece, if you pulled out any piece, none of the rest of it would hold together. At least the stuff that stayed, because a lot got cut. But the stuff that did stay, I think, is propping up the other pieces. So the story of the water is necessary to understand the loss within the family, because it talks about loss on a private level and loss on a public level. And then that feeds into the California drought. So the book starts during a wildfire that burned my home neighborhood during that drought. And that's related, the same sort of idea of loss and change.
Yeah, that opening, your book kind of begins in terror, right? That's one thing that really won me over, just this monster approaching, of the fire and the threat of it. But I was, and this is in a good way, I was confounded by the book because I could never catch you. It's like, I thought, oh, this is what it's about. No, it's not. It's about this. No, wait, it's about this. which made me really happy as a reader. And I'm amazed that you bring up Great Plains, because the genius of that book is just driving that truck everywhere. You know, it gave him structure, because everywhere he went was these amazing stories that he could then plumb history. And, you know, he's such a kind of a droll comedic genius. So can you tell me a little bit about the Mary Austin stuff?
Yeah,
It's really cool.
I wanna read something to give you a sense of her book.
Yes. Yeah.
Her most famous book is called Land of Little Rain, and it was published in 1904. And it was really ahead of its time, I think, as far as writing about place and environment. And so I'm going to read just one quote from that book, which is one of my favorite Mary Austin quotes, which just gives a sense of her voice. So she's living in my valley at the time that she's writing this, in this little brown house in the town of Independence that you can still go and see. It's mostly unchanged. And I have a friend who painted that house when she was working as a house painter, and she said there's just this energy in the Mary Austin house that was just unreal. But I haven't been inside yet, but I hope to. So, okay, this is Mary Austin. For all the toll the desert takes of a man, it gives compensations, deep breaths, deep sleep, and the communion of the stars. Wheeling to their stations in the sky, they make the poor world fret of no account. Of no account you who lie out there watching, nor the lean coyote that stands off in the scrub from you and howls and howls.
Yeah.
But she's also really funny. So I want to read a quick thing also from how I introduce her. Because I introduced her kind of in conversation with my mom, who moved to my area of her own, just kind of because she wanted to be in sort of a weird mountainous place. And she was a teacher. And at one point she cross-country skis 18 miles over a fresh avalanche debris to get to the school, which is closed by the avalanche to feed the hamster. So, and she was on search and rescue, and they would bury her under the snow to practice finding people that had been buried by avalanche. So she was wild. And so I introduced Mary Austin, kind of, what is it about this landscape and this place that draws these women that can't really be contained in other places by other aspects of society? So here's some of Mary Austin's humor. This is from her autobiography. Okay, so when Mary Austin was young, an etiquette manual advised her in conversing with gentlemen. According to the manual, Austin recalled, she ought to, quote, lead the conversation along genteel bypaths of literary and musical comment, affording ample opportunity for his whiskers to display for her benefit those gems of wisdom which only gentlemen could produce. She was to suggest topics of conversation without expressing an opinion, as gentlemen would tell a lady what to think. Not Mary, they wouldn't, Austin wrote. They would have to be spry about it, or Mary would end by telling them. So she's just fun. That's her as a young woman in like 1880, having those thoughts.
Is she a kind of a muse for you in a way?
Definitely.
Yeah? I have a bunch myself. I still remember, I don't know what it was like for you. Were you always a desert fiend? I became a desert fiend. I was always around desert. I mean, San Diego, you know, we'd go out to the desert a lot, and my Mexican family had a lot of desert roots. But I don't know what happened to my head when I first read Edward Abbey. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. The desert, it is the center of the universe. And I find myself redirected often by writers I love. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm curious about her position for you, and maybe who else has helped steer your craft around. I have so many, it'd fill an hour.
Yeah, I know. I have to. Well, I have a whole page. I have a whole page in the back of the book that is specifically like not sources, but like specific authors and their books that were informative to the ideas as this was developing. So she was definitely a muse, because it was just kind of, I think part of this book was like me sort of continuing a conversation with these historical figures. So William Mulholland, the engineer of the aqueduct, I'm kind of conversing with him and like wrestling with his complicated legacy and how it's affected my life. Throughout the book, I go to his grave. And then Mary Austin is the same. I'm sort of like, even when I'm just here and like walking around in the desert by myself, which I do a lot, I feel like I'm in conversation with her in some way. So yeah, they're muses for sure, but almost like they're still participating.
Yeah. Yeah, I get this funny feeling that people aren't really gone. So it might just be because of the stuff I write, but there's a lot of, huh?
In the Hummingbird's Daughter, I don't know. I feel like there's a ongoing, maybe part of the power of that book is there's this kind of ongoing presence that follows you around when you finish reading it.
Yeah, I had some really weird experiences writing that book, actually, a lot. And so much so that my editor at the time was really interested in me writing a nonfiction book about what you're talking about, the weird stuff that happened. And I'm kind of curious, since we brought that kind of thing up, did you find a sort of a cognitive shift at all after finishing your book? I mean, was it a transformative thing for you? Have your horizons opened or closed or changed in any way from this process? Because I bet they have. That's my feeling, but I don't know.
Yeah, it'd be so sad if I just said no.
Wouldn't it?
I'm the same as when I was 24 and started this.
So. Yeah, right.
Thankfully for everyone, especially me. Maybe not the people that now get extended lectures from me about water infrastructure at dinner parties. They might not be grateful about that change. But no, the book kind of tracks my life over the last decade or more. And I was like learning this stuff as I was writing it. So when the California drought hit, I took a road trip with a friend for a couple of weeks, and we drove around California and we visited the worst hit communities, and we interviewed like shepherds that had lost most of their flock and people whose wells were dry. And it kind of appears in the book because I mention it, but it was really it was teaching me how to see my home as it changed. And it was teaching me how to see this sort of like rolling change on a huge scale, and think about geologic time, but also think about like the immediate consequences of choices of us now and also us historically. So I feel like writing this book completely changed how I approach everything. It was just such a good exercise in critical thinking, the process of writing it.
Wow. That's cool. I remember driving around the state, and those long stretches of highway where there are the dead orchards beside the road, and they have signs like "killed by the government," because it really was who got the water doled to them. And if you're not, for whatever reason, you're not chosen, your entire world just turns to white bones. And I found it so eerie.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think. Maybe now, especially in light of what's happened the last couple of years, we're understanding as a country, that grand hand of fate and of decisions being made that affect us that we don't even know are coming. I don't know. So how are we doing for time? I know pretty soon we're going to get some questions, but I wanted to ask you two things. One, tell us about Bishop. You're a home girl, man. Tell us about the homeland. And secondly, what are you working on? What's coming before people start asking questions?
Okay, so Bishop, and I'd be interested to see, because Luis has been to Bishop, and when I talk to the folks at Spellbinder, which is the local bookstore, they're all thrilled and they remember it fondly, and they were so excited when we blurred my book. So he's a bit of a local, our hometown hero here as well. So you'll have to tell me if my description of Bishop squares with your memories of Bishop. It's kind of like, what I like about Bishop is slightly its ugliness in a way. Like it's a hot, flat valley with brush, nothing but brush around us. And then we've got the highway coming right through town, which is Main Street. And it's got really loud trucks on it all the time, and like trailers with hay and trailers with horses, and then tourists in sports cars blasting through and immediately getting pulled over because you can't go more than 25 miles per hour on Main Street. And the cops are just looking for the out of town shiny cars. If your car's too clean, you're a goner. And then all the locals drive around in their trucks, and I walk when I do my errands, so I like it because I live in town and I can get anywhere on foot in 10 minutes. So I just walk around to do errands, and you go in stores and you see people you know, and often you'll actually see someone you know driving down Main Street and you'll wave. And I've seen cars parked like waiting at the red light on Main Street, and they'll be passing snacks back and forth between the two cars between the windows. So it's that kind of town. And I like it because we have a pretty big we're pretty diverse politically, and I like that because it keeps me interacting with ideas that are different than mine and keeps discourse happening. But we all have something in common here, which is that we really love the area, and it's nice to be able. It's like there's that common ground, and then from there you can actually have a discussion with people. And it's a really humble place. There's not a lot of pretense, so I love it dearly. I'll never leave.
Oh yeah, really? That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think I've been too much of a vagabond, and I think, where would I settle? And I think, I don't know anymore. But yeah, I saw all that stuff. I can see what you're saying. I remember more trees than you're admitting to. There were a lot of nice green trees. But I was that guy in the shiny car, as I confessed before we started. My agent rated me a Dodge Challenger. Huh?
Just go 25 miles an hour in your Challenger.
I drove carefully. It's my wife who's the maniac. I was going slow. That's cool. And tell me a little bit about Mono Lake too.
Yeah.
I don't know if people, how many people know about it or not, but it's like our own private Pink Floyd album cover in California. It's mind-boggling.
Google it. It looks like the moon. It has these tufa towers, and some of them are like 15 feet tall, and it's otherworldly. But that's also attached to the Los Angeles Aqueduct. And in the 80s, there was a pretty intense battle between local people who were like, this is a really important gull habitat, and you can't drain it completely because there's a massive lake in Owens Valley that used to have steamboats going across it. And it was fully drained by Los Angeles by 1924. And then it was a massive dust hazard for years. And now it's an ongoing struggle to do dust control. So people don't want that to happen to Mono Lake. So that it's protected contentiously. It's an ongoing struggle to protect it. But it's super cool looking. And yeah, Google it. It looks like Mars or the moon or something.
In fact, it may have actually been on a Pink Floyd album cover.
Really?
Yeah, that one with the guy on fire on the album cover. You know that one? God, what was that album called? Wish You Were Here, or something like that. But there were surreal photographs, and there's one of a diver and the reflection, and I think that might have been Mono Lake, that the body is echoing the towers in the water. It's on the inside of the album cover.
Oh, I'm gonna have to look into this.
Rock and roll trivia.
Yeah, swimming.
Yeah, it's a beautiful picture. You might want it. You might put it up on your wall.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna look into it.
So what are you working on, or are you, or do you have a plan? Or have you already got one done? What's going on?
I wish I already had one done. No, it'll be years. I'm only giving one clue about the latest project on these.
Oh yeah, don't give away any secrets.
One clue.
Okay.
It's gonna have to do with Vikings.
Vikings?
Vikings. That's why I asked you, is it okay to write something completely different for your next book?
Yes. Vikings. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm in. I'll get it. My daughter's gonna freak out. She loves Vikings. She thinks she's a Viking.
Has she read the Icelandic sagas?
She knows everything about Norse religion. I'll give you an example. She gets scared on boats, right? And we were taking a boat somewhere off Maine, and she was sitting with her eyes closed and her lips moving. And we said, what are you doing? And she said, I'm praying. We said, you're praying? You that scared? She said, I am. I'm praying. I'm praying to the Norse god of ships to help this ship not sink. And I was like, I've had it with this Viking. Yeah. So
Cool.
I'm in. I'm in.
Teach me a thing or two then.
Yeah, she's really good. In fact, we're weird accidentally pals with Neil Gaiman, and when he was doing his Norse myths book, he actually sent it to her and said, what do you think? You don't, you've grown up in this, so you don't know how extraordinary that is. But yeah, she considers herself quite an expert. It might just be from having a crush on Tom Hiddleston as Loki in the movies, but it turned into something real. So
you got to start somewhere.
Huh? What'd you say?
You got to start somewhere.
Oh yeah, you sure do.
You got to start somewhere.
Yeah, totally.
We're having some lighting.
Yeah, we're having a little electronic weirdness. So, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions.
Okay,
all right, so this question is from Amy. For Kendra, I noticed you didn't mention rock climbing in your book, except to mention that your family were not technical climbers. How do you view climbers in Bishop? And do you see a future for Bishop to grow more as an outdoor enthusiast town?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'm not a climber. I have a lot of friends who are climbers. I think that climbers are like any other person that loves doing something. There's a lot of them who I think they have this sort of beautiful connection with the place where they're climbing, and they learn about it and they treat it really well. And then there's others that kind of don't, just like any visitors, just like fishers, just like campers. But what I like about the Eastern Sierra is that I think it attracts people who do tend to fall in love with the place and do tend to come to see it really deeply and often stay if they can. And that's kind of what I wanted. Another thing I wanted the book to do was sort of make this a fuller place to people who visit it so that they'll want to take care of it.
All right. So we have a question from Alex. What insight do you hope readers gain about a place like Bishop and Eastern California after reading your book, given that certain geographies tend to be often overlooked when we think about California literature? How do you hope to contribute to the conversation about our state's literary legacy?
Well, gosh, I in my wildest hopes and dreams, I would like to I know that like I have to describe where this place is within California, even to Californians, because we're not the Bay and we're not the Central Valley, and even the Central Valley kind of mystifies people. They're like, what? I'm like, that's where your food comes from. But and we're not LA. So I like the idea of kind of making the picture of California more complex, both within California itself and then beyond, because I think the country has a preoccupation with California and it's kind of a shallow one. And it's a really complex state, and it's mostly, large parts of it are desert. And if we can know that can kind of like help us readjust our expectations of how we're going to live here, how we're going to continue to live here. So a lot of what I write about in the book is this booster mentality and the way that California was settled so aggressively, so early, really relying heavily on this imported water. And we're now kind of coming up against that not really being sustainable as the snowpack on the Sierras changes with climate change. Our reservoirs aren't really functioning the way they're built to. And we're gonna have to start getting really creative. And individual communities are gonna have to start really digging in and taking care of each other to weather natural disaster and changes in resource distribution and all this stuff that's going to be coming. The California drought was a taste of that. So I guess I hope to start some of those conversations about, like, we're going to have to make decisions. We're going to have to do things differently. We can look at history and we can think about things that were done deliberately or not, and how we want to learn from that now going forward with a lot of uncertainty.
I just want to give a shout out to Vera in the chat who wrote, "No one understands the concept of Eastern California."
Right. I'm like, it's just Nevada. It's Western Nevada.
All right. Our next question is actually from Vera. After growing up in the Owens Valley, did you have preconceived notions or your own story for the place? What was the most surprising or challenging thing you learned while researching and writing this book?
Yeah, definitely just didn't really have complex picture. I didn't have that complex of a picture of the water conflict. That got a lot more complex and interesting the more I started researching, and I just kind of had a sense of wrong done. But something that horrified me, but was also in a way made me love it even more here, was the story of the indigenous people from Payahunadu, the Paiute, who were systematically an attempted systematic extermination took place. The U.S. Army was involved. This was in the 1860s and 70s. And there was a death march. I had no idea. There was a death march, about 1,000 people, hundreds of miles through the desert in July, abandoned. And those people, the survivors, came back. So a lot of what I wanted to talk about in Miracle Country was resilience and was communities digging in and taking care of each other and themselves. And so that story was something I was shocked that I didn't know growing up here, that I had to go and dig for, in all of its implications, both the tragedy of it and then the resilience. That community is still alive and well here.
All right, our next question is from Jan. I left the Inland Empire in Southern California for fear of water shortages. I still worry about the crowding there. Are any thoughts on those who are brave enough to stay or foolish enough to keep building homes?
Well, that's a tricky one because I live in California already, and so for me to say no one else can come here, feels a little hypocritical. I guess I feel like development and boosterism, as it continues to happen, is going to have to change its tune. You know, we can't have 5 swimming pools to a block in Los Angeles and continue to have drinking water. So there will need to be kind of expectations of scale and kind of a cutting back if we're all going to live here together.
Great answer. I have a question for Luis from Donna. Luis, love The Devil's Highway. Several of your titles have water in them. The Water Museum, for example. How does the motif of water parallel with what you've read in Kendra's book?
That's a great question. Well, you know, growing up on the Tijuana border, there was, compared to Tijuana, San Diego was like the well-watered Garden of Eden. I didn't realize till I went elsewhere that it wasn't exceptionally well-watered either. I have this strange feeling about water. You know, water utterly fascinates me, and you'll find if you read stuff I write about writing, water is always part of that. I don't know why, but I think it's because, you know, coming from a kind of a dry zone, coming from a place, certainly originally born in Tijuana, it's my first parts of my childhood, you know, the water, you didn't dare get any water, for example, when you bathed in your mouth back then. I was fascinated by rain. About every time I was anywhere where it actually rained, I just flipped out, and I still do. The first thing that happens when it starts raining here, I live in Illinois, we get a lot of rain. I go out in the rain. I can't even believe it yet at this late age. So I responded very strongly to that element. To me, water is almost a mystical element, you know, and it speaks, and it sets a kind of a soul agenda for a landscape. So the thievery of the water really moved me in that book. And it's a theme that I think is really important all over the world. And, you know, we're facing a lot of crises. And one of them is water worldwide. So, you know, it's important to me. And it's probably, I mean, there were so many elements that I responded to in Kendra's book. That was definitely one of the amazing ones. And you know, it was canny to bring up this looming fire, because you know, San Diego, oh, you know, California went through a lot of bad fires. So drought and satiation means a lot to me. There was a period here, that book, The Water Museum, somebody mentioned, he was inspired by the drought here in Illinois. And they were actually sending out these foundation remediation crews because it was so droughty that the land was pulling away from houses, separating. And they had to come and put something in between the earth and the house because foundations were being exposed. And I started thinking about a short story as an homage to Ray Bradbury, one of those science fiction stories you don't know is science fiction till the end, but about a place like Illinois in the drought where the children, you realize, have never really seen water. And it's a school trip. Once you're in 7th grade, you're all taken to the water museum to see what water was like. And they don't like it. It scares them, which I thought would be a kind of a parable for the tragedy of misuse of water. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that was part of my response to the book. Definitely.
Can I actually read a passage from that water museum story? The description, Luis, your description of rain when the kids have never seen it. I love that passage so much. I actually like cried a lot when I read it because I was thinking about. I did because I was thinking about years ago because I was thinking about like changed places and never being able to get that essence of a place back, and like losing like future generations, like losing these simple things. So anyways, I'll just read this one. This is the description of the children going to the museum, the water museum, and experiencing simulated rain that made me cry a lot. So this is Luis's writing, not mine. This is from the water museum. Rain like lace curtains, rain like smoke, rain like spider webs and flags and wind you could see. Rain that sang to their bones, that ached inside their bellies and their hands. Rain that made them thirst and cower and hide. Rain they had never felt yet knew as intimately as they knew their own skins. It's that last part. They know this thing intimately and yet it's gone.
Well, thanks, Kendra.
All right. Speaking of titles, this question is from Lisa. I'm about halfway through the book. Maybe this will be revealed, but I'm curious about the significance of the title. Perhaps you could talk a bit about how you selected it.
Yeah, so the title is a little bit ironic, I think, but also not. Like, I think anyone who is familiar with the Eastern Sierra, but also anybody who has a complicated relationship with a place, can recognize ways in which it's miraculous, but ways in which it's also not. Like a lot of times the miracles we want for a place or the people or even people, they don't come true. So a lot of the miracles in Miracle Country don't come to pass. Like my mom gets sick and she dies when I'm 16, and my brother, my family spirals out of control, and the water is gone and the landscape has changed and things are really hard. And yet there's still this sort of there's still this sort of like transcendent quality to being here. It kind of like moving home. The book is about me moving home to be next to a lot of my hardest memories, both personally and then also like a really hard history. So it's kind of like a dark miracle in a way.
All right, we have a few more questions and then we'll wrap up. This is a question from Kathy. What were you taught in school about local history, water, and Native Americans?
So if I'm forgetting things that I was taught, I apologize, because I was a pretty mostly didn't go to school in high school and went to my job at Tom's Place instead. So apologies if I missed something, but not really anything. I'm going to say nothing. We were taken to Manzanar, which was the Japanese internment camp during World War II, which is also in the valley. Another pretty complicated aspect of our history. We were taken there. I don't remember being taught anything about. I went to Mammoth High School, which is another little town here in the Eastern Sierra, and I don't remember being taught anything about local history really at all, other than that.
Well, I hope that there's been an improvement over the recent years in our education system on that. So our next question is, asking as an expat Californian, what drove you away from California, and what brought you back?
Yeah, that's the whole book. I can't do too many spoilers, but yeah, initially it was the death of my mom when I was 16. So this kind of idyllic childhood on the mountainside overlooking the desert became suddenly very empty, and so I ricocheted off. And coming back was spending a long time coming to terms with both the personal losses here and also the history, and needing to come back and just missing it and wanting to come back despite it being hard.
Okay, we have one last question, and this is also from Jan. I read McPhee's book, Constructing California. I wonder if you've read this book or others by McPhee, and if it has any influence on your writing.
I haven't read that book. I've read a lot. I think I've read chunks of it. I like McPhee, and I like his essay, Los Angeles versus the Mountains. That might not be the exact title, but it's something like that. Was really helpful to me early on in writing this, because it helped me think about how we have these plans and we have these things that we're going to build, and these little things that we think are very important in our life. But we have to play on the terms of the geology. We have to play on the terms of the climate. And we're reminded of that in certain places like California a lot.
Okay, and that should do it for the stream. Thank you again, Kendra and Luis. It was such a wonderful talk, and I know just looking at the chat, a lot of people enjoyed it. And for those of you who would like to re-watch this talk, it will be available within an hour on Crowdcast. Just use the same link and you'll be able to re-watch the talk. And also, if you're considering purchasing Kendra's book, Miracle Country, just click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer screen. We also have some of Luis's books on our site, so make sure to check out our online catalog. And again, you can learn more about our future virtual events on our website calendar or by subscribing to our newsletter. Our next event is scheduled for tomorrow, July 22nd at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time with Danica McKellar. And that about does it. Thank you again for joining us, and stay safe out there, everyone. All right, good night.